Welcome to 144,000teachers.org, and we are presently in the library where we invite you to look at section 12, the ultimate survival system. And this is how you can continue your study on your own as you look at 144,000 teachers. You simply go to the menu in the library and come down to section 12 and 13. And here we have the section 12 is the ultimate survival system based on 19 books. And we have divided them in 8 types of survival skills according to these books. We also invite you, if you have not done so yet, to listen to those 2 videos so far prepared. And each session will have its own video attached to it. This one we chose to call it Survival Skills Number 1. And it has an A and a B section. And preparation is the key is the title we chose to give to those 2 videos. They're not the same. This one is an introduction, and this one is basically the core of the study of the books. As we look now at the book itself, there are 19 of them, and we have divided them in 8 types of survival skills. The first skill being preparation is the key. And that is from the book Alive After the Fall, which we recommend that you read. We will not read every pages for you, but we give you an overall in the video. And preparation is the key. Pages 1 to 27 is very, very much eye-opener. This survival has not been prepared by the author simply in the case of a HEMP, which is a high energy magnetic pulse, which can be man-made, but it also can be created, as you will discover if you listen to the first and second video. It is created also by solar flares. It can come from the sun, which is a natural occurrence. It can also happen with lightning. And any storm can create HEMP, which is basically at the ionosphere level, and it can actually bring the electricity down, it can bring the transformer down, and it can be for a number of days. It can also be created. The preparation is the key when you are facing snowstorms. And some people think this happened only in the North Country, but we know from experience now that the South countries like United States have been suffering from the vortex, the cold vortex from the north this winter, 2021, and many were not prepared. So this gave us a lesson. And that's why these books, when they came along a few months ago, we thought they were very appropriate to start an ultimate survival system, which may not be a last one, an extreme one, but it can still be making you prepare to face whatever comes your way. The second part of the book, which we chose to divide it from 28 to 89, has to do with shelter, water, food. It's basically a resume, you could say, of all the other skills that we're presenting here. They're all inclusive. So, but it's worth it to look into. This is the session that we're going to be looking at right now. But before doing this, we would like to show you the other skills, the way we have chosen to divide them. You may You may choose to do otherwise, but this is the way we will be presenting it, which means that the next session will be based on surviving martial law, survival guide to handcrafted weapons, self-defense for women. But because, as we mentioned, we do recommend that you read these pages because we will not read all these pages. And each session will always cover one of those important subjects as well. So when we study, for example, the self-defense here, we will definitely bring you some more information regarding those important preparation too. The third one here, the survival skill 3, is the last resort home defense and how to build a simple do-it-yourself home bunker. Very, very important information as well, how to prepare a house, and not related necessarily to the storms. Most of us will remember what has happened in the fall of 2020 with all the riots in the United States and even some minor one in Canada. We know that many people's homes have been under attack, and Many homes are not prepared for being attacked. Many people do not realize that even their front doors is very, very easy to break, and their windows are very easy to break to enter in. And although those things may happen way into some other countries, do not expect that to not happen to you. We can look at South America and we can look at countries that have lived through this constantly, and these people are much better prepared than we are. Are we trying to scare you? No, that's not the purpose. This is simply an educational program for ultimate survival system so you can live and not just survive in case of different happening in the weather or in politics or whatever comes your way. Now, the fourth one is very, very important. Maybe that's why there are so many books consecrated to it. So we brought them together and we call it the survival skills number 4, which is food for freedom. So the first one is preparation, and then we enter into the different subjects. So this one here is divided with number 4. As you can see, we have many books that comes along this way. The food for freedom, do-it-yourself greenhouse blueprint, container gardening secrets, setting up your survival seed bank, and the one here that is very important, simple survival canning. And the pages and the images shown are absolutely beautiful. The longest one is this book here, Food for Freedom. 140 pages. It's actually the book that has the most pages, 140 pages. This is the one that's the longest of the whole collection. The second longest is having to do with the next section, the next skill, and it has to do with 29 plants that may save your life, wild food. And this one I recommend greatly because this is the one that's going to be the theme for our camping this summer with young students. We started that last year and they're looking forward to go camping again. We go during the week where there are only anybody in the campsite. It's a very well recommended campsite. We do not go just in the wilderness. And of course, we're a bit more comfortable than the average. We have an RV and the children are young, very young, but we want them to learn. And we will be doing some videos regarding this. They're very surprised that you can eat flowers in the wild. And many of these children need to learn that city dwelling is not where you can survive the best. And they love it. They're accustomed to it. At first, they were disturbed because they could hear the birds in the morning to wake them up. They're not accustomed to that, some of them. Or at night, the darkness. It's extremely dark when you go camping. And they find it extremely hard because they're not accustomed to darkness if they are city dwellers. Now, we would not take children that lives in the country to go camping. They know more than we do. Now, the second one of that series of survival skills, number 5, has to do also with ultimate survival medicine. What a wonderful book to study. And again, it has a lot of insight as to first aid, what to do in the forest if you hurt yourself and if you break a leg or break a bones. Of course, you may want to go and run to the hospital. But what if there is no hospital available? You never know. Now, we have a survival skills here, number 5, again, that includes wilderness survival medical guide. This one is kind of a bit scary. It has to do with what do you do if you encounter animals, wild animals, while you're even just camping? Would you know what to do? And some of these animals are very tame, but what they're showing here is what if they have rabies or some other kind of disease that makes them very aggressive? Would you know what to do? And this is talking about being in the wild. Now we have number 6. We chose to put it by itself because it's a very, very important subject, secrets to sanitization. When you are even just camping, you need to be extremely clean and be very, very careful, especially having to do with water. Water can make you sick if it is actually unclean. And you would not know unless you have analyzed the water if it's drinkable. That's why when we go camping, we have the luxury of being able to bring some gallon of waters. We buy them from the store. We do not go and get the gallons of water in the forest. and we strictly stay with this kind of water as we do camping. But what if you do not have that luxury? How would you know what to do with that water? And also to wash and clean. And so if you have a stove, this is necessary because you need to boil that water. Now, the number survival skills number 7 is power tips to make your house more energy sufficient. And the second one is to create your own solar panels and wind turbines. And you may not think that this has to do with now. We'll look at the news of this past winter, 2021, in Texas, where they're supposed to be the king of electricity. All the power was shut down, and some people were without power for over a week. And also, we recall the ice storm in Montreal, in Quebec province, a number of years ago now, about 20 years ago. But that was also a catastrophe where the city was totally covered in ice. And the people who had the less trouble, they said it openly in the news, were the people who lived in the country and had generators which function with gas, and they were equipped for that as well. But these are very important skills to develop, and it doesn't have to be that it's a catastrophe or a bomb that has fallen. It doesn't even have to be a volcano or a big storm. It can simply be a snowstorm and everything stops, or an ice storm. Now, the number 8, but not the least, is how to get more mileage per gallons from your vehicles. And that is if you still are able to drive, because when you have a major HEMP, energy magnetic field pulse, that breaks down basically all of your, and it's explained very well in this pages 1 to 27 here of skill number 1. There's not much you can do with your cars and your vehicles, especially with the new one. And they mentioned that very clearly in skill number 1. So the gas is very important, and especially when you hear about the news, even this week here in Canada, the carbon gas tax has been actually approved by the court, the high level of the Court of Canada. And now we're going to see not only the natural gas, but the gas at the pump increasing. And if you look at the percentage, we start at about 80 cents from this past few months, and now and 90 cents for some, but it's going to climb up to at least $1.30 even this year. So we need to be prepared, even if we plan to go and travel. This is a liter, that's not a gallon. If you multiply by 4, you will have the price of the gallon there. We will be paying over $5 a gallon if you want to go that route. But this, we need to be prepared, and we need to know what to do in the next few months, because this is not necessarily like just to scare anybody away. That's why we call it preparation is the key. If you're prepared, you should be fine. It's better be informed than sorry. So without further ado, this is where we were at the last session, if you take time to study the video that has been prepared. And now we will go to the survival skill, alive after the fall, and we're going into the wise advices, the shelter, the water, and the food. So we take you now to this particular book as we're opening it up, and we're simply gonna go down to the page which we have looked at last week. And now this is where we are going, and we're going to end up at page 27. This is where we're going. There we go. And we're calling it, this is page 27, which we read. And now your house is your shelter. And of course, as we mentioned, we are not prepared to read the rest of the book up to page 89. So we will give you overall look at it. And here it's mentioned about the EMP again attack, which could be caused by the sun or by a lightning event, but EMP can also be man-made. And they reassure you that your house becomes your most important asset. And though we have also looked into containers, which are a very solid type of a home, if you go that route, if you already have a home, but this has to be in the country. In the city, it will be practically impossible to survive, especially if you're still attached to the grid, meaning electricity, gas, propane. So you need to be independent. So this is where it talks about preparation. So the perfect shelter. What you need the most is water. And salt water will need to be purified, and you have to remove the salt from it before you can use it. So you need fresh water source. And this means you need a well, your own independent water, and you need septic tank as well. So these are procedures that you need to prepare. And if it's not prepared yet, this should be your first plan of action. We're not telling you that you have to do it today. We're giving you some advices. So here is also another advice that is very sound, is to have plenty of room for gardening. And this, it will be shown with the next sections that we have to still go through with you. And also they recommend that you may want to have animals. Well, for some of us who are vegan, we do not really need animals, and they're more demanding and more expensive than if you were vegans and you could live easily with the greenhouse. And these greenhouse that they have in these programs are marvelous. They're very, very well proposed. It's always small. It's not for a big group of people. And as we were recommended with the first session, if you were there was 8 people, 8 to 11 people at the most is recommended to start a program like this, which includes, of course, the member of your family. But if you don't have any family per se, and if you want to gather these people, every one of them, you should choose them very carefully, having to do with what are they good for. That's as simple as that. If you have an electrician, if you have a plumber, if you have a mechanic, if you have a technical person that can fix everything, if you have a person who knows how to cut wood and prepare it for the winter, I mean, you're set. If you have a cook, and if you have another person that is very, very vigilant with cleaning, sanitization, these people have to have all the different, and they should be recognized for their capacities. So you don't just pick a group of people. It's very important. And though you may have missed the first session, which we chose not to tape because it was a casual opening session, we're going to these steps now one by one. So we do recommend that you read this. It talks about definitely having to do a wood burning stove, oil lamps, and this is what they say too. If you try to heat up the entire home, this will not be possible. And what we learned, specifically what we learned from Texas this winter, there was one particular gentleman and his family who did not suffer the cold, he said in an interview, because they were campers. The whole family, the children, everybody knew how to do camping in the mountains. So what they did something very unusual but very wise. They set up the tent in the living room, and they divided the house with they definitely put a lot of water in the bathtub and wherever they could save water, as long as the water was not frozen. And then they shut down their pipes, so they didn't have any damage in the home like we saw on the news. Many people they didn't know that when the cold comes, you shut the pipes because the water will freeze and you can damage your whole building. And now this gentleman, they live over a week in that tent where it was a smaller surface, which that's what is mentioned here. You have to close off one room in your house so that you can, I will read the paragraph. Something else you will need to keep in mind when setting up the perfect shelter is the temperatures of the area where you live. If you live in an area with mild temperature or one that experiences extreme cold, which that's what Texas went through this winter, it was mild and it turned out extremely cold. It is more efficient to create a microclimate by closing off one room in your house, in your home. So trying to heat your entire home with a single wood burning stove, oil lamps, and body heat is not only inefficient, but it is also a waste of the resources that you will have after an EMP attack or a snowstorm or an ice storm and even a tornado. So to set up a microclimate, confine everyone to a single room, saving precious fuels for having to heat the entire house compared from having to use that. So here they say also that you should choose a room that is well insulated in the interior part of your home, and try to avoid a room with windows, as they will allow cold air in through the cracks. And this is true even with double paned windows. So this gentleman, what I saw, he was in the living room. It's kind of hard to find a house without windows, but they decided to be in the living room. There was a large family, and they set up their tents, which they use usually for camping, with all their gears like sleeping bags and the wood stove, the little stove, like it was a propane stove. And of course that was not in the tent because you could damage your lungs, but everything was organized, and they were able to heat up that tent much better than if they had kept the big house all in the open. The bathroom, of course, was still usable. They had the water there. And I guess to keep it from freezing, if you fill up a full bathtub, it would need to get pretty cold in the house to freeze that water. But nevertheless, you can also move the ice each time it starts building up, so that and break it, so you still will have your water. And of course, then you have to boil that water. And if you have a little propane camp stove, you're okay. So you have to organize this. And of course, they had the clothes for it, being accustomed to go camping. At night, it can get very cold, even in Texas. So they were equipped. And they said that they stayed about 6 days without electricity in their home. They didn't attempt to use electricity at all. It was not available. And though it was not like their home, the whole house being used, they said that they were very comfortable being already trained to do camping. So I thought it was a wonderful testimony of survival. And in this case, of course, it lasted only 1 week, but what if it lasts for a month or 2 or 3 and even more? So here also what I find in this particular pages, and I promise we will not read the whole book. You have to do your homework, but the beginning of these paragraphs are so important. During your months of preparation, you need to purchase several rolls of plastic sheeting, staples, rolls of duct tape. And this is how you can also create your microclimate if you do not have a tent. Might be less expensive to buy a big tent. And start by covering the open entrances or doorways and windows of your chosen room with a plastic sheet. Tape the edges of the sheeting with the duct tape, leaving one edge open to enter and exit the room. So you're creating a tent inside of one of your room, basically. And like they say here, you have to, if you have make sure that you have proper ventilation. If you do it around the fireplace, which would be ideal if you have a stove, but you still need to be careful with the smoke and carbon monoxide. So you want to keep your family safe from harmful pollutant, and that would be damaging. Some people also died in Texas. We don't want to be a carriers of bad news, but that's what happened. Some people did die because of not with having no knowledge. They died because exactly this. They tried to run their stove and they didn't know that a wood stove will create some smoke, and you could end up with using even a little stove with propane, and that will also create some problems. So if you plan to use a generator to run an electric stove or other small appliances, do not bring it into the room with you, because again, a generator runs with gas and you could risk to suffocate with carbon monoxide, and that should be left outside. So there are definitely some preparation you need to do. You need a large extension if you have a generator. And again, there are definitely, it says here, during time of emergencies, people can become desperate and may try to get to you and your family if they suspect you have a lot of supplies. So they might even try to smoke or burn you out. A way to help reduce risk of losing your shelter from a fire or being evacuated due to excessive smoke is to find a home made of fireproof material. That's why we're suggesting the containers. It's probably the only type of a building that would be fireproof. It's a container. And if it is within your budget, then you have to build a hidden safe room with a second concealed exit. That can be a wise investment and keep you and your family safe in any disaster or event. So now we have an example during the Second World War where some people have escaped living in their own house. They have stayed in their own house, but they built a secret room, and that sounds like excessive preparation, but if you never need it, well, it's done, it's presented. And they do give you some ideas how to do that as we go along here, and it's quite interesting. And of course, concrete is a good building supply. So if you don't want to work with containers, concrete will also be a good building supply that can protect you from the element. And then, of course, for survival supplies, you need multiple storage facilities for items that cannot tolerate variation of temperature. For example, food, battery, water, this all need to be dry and cool. So you cannot keep that all in one place either. What they're suggesting is make several areas throughout your shelter, and this way it cannot be found easily. And what they call it, apocalypse room. So here there is some suggestion, very good suggestion, sample how to hide your goods. So what you do is you can do it in the back of a linen closet. And if you remove the sheetrock of the back of the closet, you can build storage shelves between the wall studs. And what you do is you replace the sheetrock and mount it to the studs with screws instead of nails. So you can undo it as you need it by section if you like. And you replace the shelves and replace the lining on the shelf to hide the back of the closet. So you can see some suggestions here that are very affordable, quite simple. And you can do it also off a finished attic if you do some space there. You can do a cubby hole storage. You can frame both ends of the cubby hole. Again, sheetrocks with screws to secure it to the frames, and hang a door across the opening that open outwards. And you can make it look simply as a doorway with a final touch, and you will have a place where you can store your material, and don't do it all in the same place, as they say. So please take time to read these wonderful advices. They're very simple, and you may think, well, this is not for me. That's fine. But we're giving this based on experience and people who have been through experiences that were not prepared, and now they're sharing their advice with you of what could be done after they have learned their lesson. So there is definitely also the way the people will respond after an attack or a riot or whatever. So you want to be sure that your family is kept and protected from harm, and that should be the first thing in your mind. You can erect some gates. That's a good idea, or some fencing. And this is interesting because if you go to any other countries, if you have traveled a bit, even in South America or in the islands, in the Caribbean islands, for example, many homes have been secure with very high fencing. They even put broken pieces of glass at the top of the fence so people cannot come. We didn't go as far as put barbed wire, but they do that. They do protect themselves, and change the lock on your door and on the fences, because those are not very solid. They can be broken easily. So they recommend to change the heavy duty locks, and you can buy that at the hardware store. The other thing that is very important too, and I will bypass these now, you need to study this. You need to read these books and start in the order that we suggest them to you, because that will bring you to organize yourself at many levels, not only one level. And the more you read, I'm telling you, yesterday when I was preparing this class, I went through all the books one by one, read them all, took me a few hours, and then was able to divide by section. This is what has happened. From reading this, I was able to divide it by sections. So this presentation now is much more simple than plunking 19 books in your hand and say, here, read this. So the other important point in these pages, and we are still in the same book, Alive After the Fall, is the preparation for food and water. And this will definitely, you will not want to miss that. The food and the water. First of all, the water is, you cannot live without water. All right. You can live without food for a while, but without water, you cannot. And you will find some very important point here, how it is so important to have clean water. That's what they say here. While you can survive for weeks without food, you can only get 3 days without water. You cannot stay very long without water. And your organs need water to function and survive. Without it, they will shut down. And then you're going to have sick people on your hand because you have unclean water or no water at all. And here they say that 30,000 to 70,000 people die every day from waterborne illnesses. So having access to clean drink water is essential. And here are the advice that they give you. It has to do with you need it for cooking, for cleaning, all of this, you need clean water. And they will give you here some what you need to do to purchase. You can buy cases and cases of bottled water, but you can also find an easier way and get this water to last longer. And so here it tells you what you can do. And we definitely recommend that this is done at the level of the country, because in the city it can be difficult when people discover that you have already taken care of that. But you can do it very discreetly, but it's still very important that you get your water. And even trying to collect runoff water from the roof, it's also very demanding and very dangerous, because you could end up with chemicals and pollutant, and especially from different rooftop. And some are contaminated too with bird feces, like pigeon, for example, adhesive chemicals, and other contaminants commonly found in roof construction. So again, if you try to catch rainwater, even in the country, this can be good for your plants, but necessarily for drinking, you really have to be prepared. All right, so please take time to read this, and it tells you how much water you will need depending on the amount of people. So how much water you need to be prepared to preserve. And you will not regret this. And they even talk here about snowfall during the year. And melting snow can be a great source for your water supply. And what you need is basically a large stock pot and melt a little bit of snow to start. And as the snow begin to melt into water, you add more snow, because you know that the snow will occupy more space than the water. And so they even teach you a basic of physics here, that's a fact of life. So they say here that as you look at the snow, it's going to melt. As the snow begin to melt into water, and more snow to the warm water to utilize the water greater density and specific heat, it melt to continue and to melt the smaller amount of snow, then this will decrease the amount of time it will take to melt the snow and conserve your fuel. So if you take a big bucket and fill it with snow, it will be longer. Just do it in small quantity at a time, and it will save you a lot of fuel. So when you are looking for a water supply, you have to look at the least contaminated source that is available. And the first water sources to be depleted will be in the inhabited areas, followed by the commercial areas. Less obvious sources like water heaters and toilet tank will be the final sources to be depleted. If you live in a rural area, your water source will be less likely to be contaminated, but it's still important to test any source that may be suspect. Test the water ahead of time if you have stored drinking water test kit. So you will need also to look out for their fecal contamination. This can be from animals, but also from human. Industrial contamination, even in the country, and pesticides. You have to check your well. If you have a well, make sure if you buy a property, make sure you have to check that well, because that well could be contaminated and you can't even use it for cooking or for washing your clothes. So it's very, very important. So do what you can to dissuade others from using the water source for disposing of waste, washing laundry, washing dishes, or bathing, to keep soaps and other contaminants out of your water source. So people could want to maybe to actually wash themselves in the same area where you're going to take that water now and boil it to drink. You can't do that. So you can find better quality water in dripping springs, flowing springs, wells, artesian wells, and fast-moving streams. So preferably, if you are just ready to move, find a place where there are running water around. And this water may not be necessarily yours. When you look at buying a place, always look around if there are some big parks, some big national parks, because you will be able to access those parks. And especially if you have gone even for camping, you will see how much water there are in those parks. It could be a river going to those parks. That's why they have become a national park. And so make sure you know your water. And if you have access to a deep well, you will need to make sure to have the manual equipment necessary to draw water without electricity. And this can be hand pump, well heads, manual well buckets, lines, and other manual equipment. And I don't know why, but in the past I've had both experience on the farms. One was run with electricity and one was actually a well outside with a pump. And of course, before buying the house, I had it checked up, and the well was well into the amount of water that you need to always have water. And though the inconvenience was to go outside and pump, but that was the idea. The house was bought without electricity, without running water, without any gas. So we had two wood stove, one downstairs with coal and the upstairs with wood. And the water was outside. And that well was very, very good. Even in the winter, if you keep on pumping it, it's deep in the ground, you can still get your water going. So these are ideas that we're giving you for water today. We're going to concentrate on water, and you can see here the container. They suggest to you containers, what you should be using. And just like food, untreated tap water needs to be rotated out. The water, when untreated, contains small amount of bacteria and algae that will grow under the right set of circumstances. So you don't want to open up those containers and everything is yellow, because now it's filled with the algae that you see in lakes sometime, or swamp that has not no circulation. So you need to label the dates of your containers and drink them in that order. So water from the tap will keep for about 6 months. However, you always want to check the water first to ensure that it looks clean and that it's drinkable. Properly stored water should be rotated once a year. Properly disinfected tap water can be stored for much longer, up to 30 years or more, if it is stored in disinfected, opaque, airtight water barrels without being opened. It is important to use new, clean, quality water containers and a contaminant-free filling process to ensure your water source is free from contaminants. So don't use a regular garden hose to fill the container. Instead, use a drinking water quality hose like those that are used to fill the water tank on an RV. When treating the water for contaminants, use a high-quality additive like chlorine dioxide or copper silver ion compounds. There's another thing that comes to mind. Because I'm blessed with an RV, it's a very small one, but RVs are probably, my suggestion would be, if you do not have the money to buy a piece of property and get yourself into even a container all set up like a home, you should check very carefully for an RV. And some people have a tendency to go for a huge one. Well, that's not my taste. I like little one. I'm by myself. I've been driving RVs for over 30 years, and they're always so self-contained. In an RV, you have your bathroom, your shower, you have the stove, you have the fridge, and everything works on its own because you travel around. And of course, the battery, I have the one we have is the one I have in this particular RV now. It has a generator. It has a what we call those big battery that works for boat. And then it has the battery for the motor of the RV itself. That's two separate batteries. And of course, every spring they need to be recharged, and you have to make sure they're alive and well. But when you recharge them, you're going to need electricity from a source. But nevertheless, if you run that RV, even in the winter, if you run it once a week, you should be able to get those batteries still living and alive. I would suggest, if you can get your hand on a good RV, don't go for the old one, but a good one, and let it be checked up by a good mechanic and somebody that knows, because there are two mechanisms in these big RV. Is the one is the motor, which makes you move around. I'm not talking about a camper. This is an RV with a motor, with a truck, and the back, which where you will live. Even when you stay in the winter at a very cold weather, if you have a furnace with, usually they work with propane, and if you have a generator, and if you even want to close the section of the bedroom, if it's not completely closed, especially the cabin, the front cabin where the driver sits and where you drive your truck, that cabin can get very cold. But the back usually is fairly warm. So if you have big blankets or even some special big folders like a dividers out of aluminum that will preserve the heat from the cold, you may want to do that as well. So there are many ways of survivals, which when we read these things, and the water source itself, well, you have the possibility of a tank that you can fill up with water. You can boil it on your little propane stove. And again, if you have, a way to, you have to check your water all the time, and you will be able to live and you will be able to drink good water, especially if you have a source where you can get some water. And there are actually some source of water even in the winter, as they were mentioning here, from the ground. It doesn't have to be a well. You can be somewhere there is a spring. This is an ideal place, and some running water that never freezes. You can be close to those. That's perfect. So don't use secondhand containers for water storage. Use containers that are airtight and have an airtight seal. Label the containers as drinking water, to be sure to include also the storage date, and keep it in a cool, constant temperature, and keep it away from toxic substances like pesticide and fuel, and keep it out of direct sunlight. Don't store the containers directly on concrete to avoid radon contamination. So there are many advices here that are very, very sound. And of course, we're not going to go through it right now, but how to disinfect and purify. These are ways of doing it. And the best one I can think of is charcoal, which actually they mention when you study this carefully. They will give you a lot of information on how to do it. For example, there are one here that is water filter straw. This allows you to drink straight from a stream, spring, or other water sources. And as the water passes through the layers of the straw, it is filtered, providing you with water that is as clean as the water you get from the tap. The straws are lightweight and are easy to carry. And they can also be set up as gravity filters, which will allow you to filter large quantity of water at a time to store for future use. So you can see here how many wise advice they are there. And of course, you need straw that have not been, of course, sprayed or anything like this. Make sure you recognize what is straw too. Some people don't even know. Straw is not grass. It's not the same at all. So here we have a chlorine bleach, which contains free chlorine, which lost its potency over time, usually between 6 months to a year. So you have to also be careful about that you know that it's still potent. And the kit also will give you some education. It has to do with pH, and make sure that just like people who have a swimming pool, you always have to watch your pH, because even that water can be dangerous to swim in. So the same with drinking water. All right. So if you have animals, well, you need supply water for them too. So this is why it's good to be a vegan. Become a vegan or a vegetarian quickly, and you won't need to have animals to feed you with your eggs and chicken and whatever. Fishes, they don't need to be taken care of. They are in the water. So here we have so many important information, and we have taken you here only to the water because this is your main survivor kit. You need water. You can live without food for a number of weeks, but you cannot live without water. And so again, iodine is presented here to disinfect, to clean. And chlorine is another one, chlorine bleach, but you have to know the percentage, how to prepare it. And they give you all this information here. 3 to 5 drops per quart will have the same effect as 2% iodine tincture. This is American, so you may have to transfer it from quarts to whatever the quantity in liters that you want to work with. But some people are very savvy about the 2 system. Myself, personally, I've never let go of the pounds and the weight that you weigh in quarts and in those things. So I do not use so much the liters, but I know both. Here is the one I really like, this particular paragraph. This is if you are faced with an emergency, you can improvise your own layered filter system using charcoal. Activated charcoal. Coffee filters, baked sand, kerchiefs, or other filtration material available to you. So if you have charcoal, if you don't have it, you can make it. You can make it with a fire, with wood. You burn the charcoal right down to the time that it's red, and you can grind it and you put it under a container, like even a cover, so that it's activated. It's simply a chemical reaction. You won't see it. It's the light part of the coal will be activated by basically the light part on the vacuum will go, and you will be left with the hard part, which that's what you want to keep for the activated charcoal. It's a chemical reaction. You're not going to see it happening. It's an oxidation. But once you do it, you will have activated charcoal, which also can be used internally. But it has to be grinded very, very fine. And some people think that they can just chew on it, but that's not the way to use charcoal. But for water, it's marvelous. It will clean that water in no time. There are even some little container that you can buy in camping places where they're selling it, and it has already charcoal. And once in a while, you need to replace the charcoal. But you can filter your water with this. So if you have to use one of these methods, if you have fuel available, be sure to boil the water to kill anything that your improvised filter system may have missed. So, and here they show you how to prepare charcoal water filter. This is wonderful. This water filter is perfect. So here you have 2 liter of soda bottle, which is kind of interesting. They go from quarts to liter in that book. You have the sand, you have the charcoal, you need a pair of scissors or a sharp knife, a piece of cloth, and then a second large container to receive the water once you filter it. And here you go. This is exactly those cups that you can get at the campsite. Same idea. It's easier to carry them than maybe this, but it's the same idea. So, and water with salt by the ocean, you can turn it into fresh water as well. And basically, you take a fairly large pot, you place an empty glass cup, preferably Paris glass or metal, in the center of the pot. And what you do is you pour some salt water into the pot. Don't overfill the pot, stopping well below the mouth of the glass. Place the pot lid upside down, so the highest point or handle is facing down, directly above the glass. Next, bring the water to a slow boil, and what's going to happen is the vapor from the boiling water will begin to condense on the surface of the lid and run down to the lowest point, the handle, and drip into the glass. So what will happen is the salt from the water will remain at the bottom of the large pot. The process is slow going. It'll probably about take 20 minutes or more to complete, and you will have used a substantial amount of fuel, but it could be what helps you to survive. The water in the glass will be extremely hot, so you have to wait for them to cool down before you can drink the water. And this is basically another chemistry, what we do in chemistry when we actually do distill water. It's a type of a distillation, but very, very primitive, but it works. Distillation is the same principle. In the lab, we have to have distilled water to work with, which has no longer any chemical inside, to filter our to clean our beakers and to filter whatever we need to be filtered with. So this is a very basic, again, chemical reaction that you will be creating, and you will basically have distilled water then. And you will see it at the bottom of the pot. It will leave the salt at the bottom. And this is what is the way to use salt water and how to clean it up. Because if you drink the water from the ocean, this is not healthy. So this is excellent. I mean, so many wonderful, wonderful things to learn here just by reading these things. All right. So again, here we have creating a filter. That's another filter using apple and tomato peels, creating a filter with sunlight. So there is definitely something to be said about this. They say take some plastic water bottles and fill them with water. Place them in the sunlight for at least 6 hours. The sun ultra rays, violet ray, will kill any parasite in the water. And for this method to work, the water has to reach 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit for a minimum of 5 hours. This I would have something to say. And I know it's harder, but I would avoid plastic water, especially the cheap one. Please make sure you have a good quality one, even if you go with containers that are more expensive, or glass. It is a fact that polyvinyl chlorine, those bottles are made of, PVC, will be attracted to the water under heat. That's why they do not recommend when you have a water bottle, do not leave them in the car and drink that water after. Yes, they might be filtered by the sun, but they also will have an increased amount of PVC in them. So make sure if you want to do this with plastic water, bottled water, you want to basically have very good quality. And now this is passing to another subject having to do with food. And again, we have the largest actually of our survival skills is food, preparation of food. But we'll just give you here an overhaul, just going through how to store food. And this is canning. It's absolutely wonderful what they do with canning in this section. Here it shows, but in the book on canning, which is only a few pages, but it shows you how to do it. And you need mason jars. So if you have we buy those usually in the fall. So make sure this coming fall, you start having your mason jars prepared to do your canning. And you can start canning right away because in the fall, peaches and pears and tomato, everything is available at the market at a very good price, even organic one. And then, of course, you can do the canning. You can buy the cans if you don't mind eating those cans, but try to make sure that they're not old because you want good quality can, and don't buy them cheap that save you money. And what they recommend too, which I believe is very wise, is do not wait until you're ready for a crisis to start buying. Buy as you go. You can want to buy maybe one can at a time or one container at a time. They are good canning with, I like myself glass better. So you can start buying like spaghetti sauce or things that you know your family likes, or pasta, or things that can preserve. And try to avoid buying them in plastic containers. Try to go for the cardboard, go for the glass, go for something quality. Also, the dry food, they will tell you as we go along. We will go back to this section when we are into next week, when we do the next session, and this will give you a better idea. So what we would like to do at this time is just to give you an overall of your planning. And you can see here the way they have planned it. It's very well kept with all the herbs. We could have increased here. I'm sorry. We should have thought about that earlier. Here you go. We could have increased the font, but it's okay. You can look at it yourself and just increase the font, and you'll see here how well prepared these people are. And those containers are good quality. I'm not going to name the company, but I know a friend who has done that. And all her jars, you can see this jar here, you can buy them. Those are glass with those lid. So these preserve very well. And these, of course, you don't need to wash and put them in. You wash them as you use them. Canned food. This is also raw nuts, unsalted, unroasted, because they will go rancid if they are already salted and roasted. So buy everything raw. Dry or canned beans can last around 8 to 10 years. So you have a good, and as we mentioned, if you have storage, glass storage or good quality plastic, that's what you want. Grain can last 12 years. That's their shelf life. And so some people might be frustrated, I don't like grain. Well, it's not what you like. It's what makes you survive. So you need your grains. You need the corn. Corn is a grain. Rice is a grain. You need corn and grain like wheat and rye, and even to make soup with barley. You need all of those. And you're not accustomed to them? Well, it's time to take cooking class. Let us know. We'll show you how to cook those things and make very easy lunch and not expensive with your noodles, spaghetti, macaroni, ribbons. Those are type of pasta. And these can keep very dry as well. And they last longer than flour. So if you're into chocolate and energy bars, which we're not, but candy, soda, milk, well, this also you can shelve if you like. But we would prefer that you get the emergency first before you get into those. But some people will not survive without them, so don't try to stop them now. And this is the part that we love the most, is Alive After the Fall. And this again, it's the whole section on food with medicine and especially herbs that you can eat. And you have to be careful because some are toxic, so you don't want to kill yourself at eating plants. And this summer, this is what we're going to be teaching. And many of them we know. Many of them, I can guarantee you, I can go in the forest and I know, because even last summer I was showing the kids to eat clovers in the field and people say, oh my, it's polluted. Well, this is a park. There is no pesticide. It's like in the woods where we go. And it's full of beautiful rivers and water. And there is a lot of cleaning in the air because green will clean up the air. So you wipe them so there is no little bugs in them and you eat them. They're sweet. Plantain is a godsend. It's beautiful. Plantain is actually the antidote of when you have some herbs that will give you all kind of some people are allergic to everything, but some herbs are really not good. They're toxic. They're not going to kill you, but they can. Poison ivy is one of them. Plantain weed is actually not a weed. You can make tea with this, and you can actually help a lot of people with prostate and problems like this. And it's the antidote of those herbs that can create those problems to you. All right, so there are pine trees. You can make tea with this. That will help you with your lungs. We teach all that. And this is what this summer coming, we're looking forward now that the children are introduced to it more from having gone last summer. We went every week for 2 months, few days at a time. These are homeschoolers that we teach during the year. So these are all plants, and actually they're easily recognizable here in Canada as well as United States. Many plants, you only need to know about 15 of them to survive and you'll be fine. Like water hemlock, you have here rhubarb. These are real rhubarb, but they're wild. And rosary pea, white snake root. So you have to have a book, and you go in the forest. I have a little books, and you can actually have fancy books of herbs with colors, and that'll be easier to find. All right, so this talks about fishing for those of you who want to eat fish to survive, which is fine. And they give you an idea how to create your own fishing pole. So without further ado now, as we have gone to practically, since we started here, about 20 pages, you can see that this book is a must. You must start here before you choose and pick the other survival program that we're suggesting, or skills. These are important for everywhere, anywhere where you live. That's why we have decided to put it on 144,000 teachers. You may not have the same herbs, but you can find a book from your own area and get going. You need at least 15 of them. And this will be important. And then, of course, we're going to come here to the wood stove, which is absolutely an efficient way to help you prepare your food, to keep your house warm. And if you're not accustomed to wood stove, they're just beautiful. Slow combustion. This one looks like a slow combustion. Do not buy just an old wood stove. They need some bricks inside too. Those bricks, when it's an old stove, they're called bricks, but they form the inside of the stove. And if these are cracked or old, they may not give you the heat, the sufficient heat that you need. This is definitely a slow combustion. And this is what you need. This is to remove the ashes. And these two here, and this one is large enough. As you can see, you can boil some water, and it has a beautiful pipes. You don't want to also go for cheap pipes. You don't want a fire in your house. And so this is very important. So if you use an indoor stove, you need ventilating pipes to cleanse the air. And we have been using in the past, it's a personal experience with good wood. You need absolutely good wood like maple and birch. You don't want the gummy one like pines. Those can be added to just continue the fire, but they're not as good for the pipes. They gum the pipes and you could have a fire in the pipes. And that has happened to me as well. So you learn by practicing these things. When you're ignorant, sometimes it's better to know in advance. So to keep it dry, you simply have to cover it with an impermeable cover, such as a plastic sheet. They're talking about here your wood. And your wood needs 6 months to dry. So if you go in the forest and you're expecting your stove to function well after you just cut the wood, no, that's not wise. So basically, they say a wood stove is an efficient way that helps you prepare your food because it can reduce the quantity of wood you are using by 1/3. Additionally, if you are using an indoor stove, we have read this, the pipes need to cleanse the air, so you need ventilation. And also, using the right fuel will help you save money, produce heat properly. This is why the wood should be stored for drying for at least 6 months. So that's why people will cut their wood. Usually it's they go in the winter, but it's mainly also in the spring. And winter is usually easier because you can transport that wood on the snow. But if the people are selling you wood, you better know your wood, because they will sell you some wood that basically goes like paper in the fire. Slow combustion is excellent, but you still need to have good wood and cut wood too. It's easier to have it cut like this to start a fire. And if you have birch, always make sure to remove the top of the birch, it's the bark, because this is your fuel starter. It's like oil on the fire. It's absolutely beautiful to start a big fire. So, but if you have a smaller, that's fine. You don't have to build a large fire. You can have a small one in a smaller stove like this. It's perfect. That's why you don't need those big old um, wood stove like the grandmother used to have, all the chrome and all the fancy stuff. You don't need that. You don't need that. You need a slow combustion, just like that. This is what we recommend here. So I'm glad they have that in this book, and I recommend you read it. And of course, you have the charcoal grill, and you want to make sure that there is no fuel on it. Be careful with that. Don't buy fuel with charcoal. Just simply, you can start it with, you can mix it with a bit of wood, even mix it with the birch. If you can get good birch, you can actually use that. So they even propose candles. Um, this is definitely a way to cook as well. I have seen it done and it works. And for those of you who are accustomed to cooking already fancy dinner with those candle, and as you cook with those, what do they call them again? Cheese, whatever. I don't use cheese so anymore. But the more candle you are using, the faster the water boils. And this is why you shall consider having candle in your stock supply when making preparations. And this has to do with candles that you buy, like, for example, at a store that is reliable. And these candles will last long. They're not just burning the first time. So you need those as well. So there are many, many things you need to study, as you can see. You can even have a solar one, and it tells you how to do it. So we will not go any further. We could go on forever. It's a beautiful book, and we recommend you start reading it as soon as possible. If you see you're not a good reader, well, look at a picture and then read the paragraph beside it. That might be enough to get you going. And if somebody else can read it with you or for you, that's good, because you're passing some instruction. We will stop here. This is the first aid medicine. You can see this book, you could say it contains all the other skills that we are presenting in the books that we have shown here in the survival. But it is not so. This is where we read from, the Alive After the Fall. But when you continue to read those, specifically here when we're talking the food, there are many, many, many instructions here, and up to the survival with plants and the ultimate survival medicine. This is incredible, all the advice they give you. And we will go through this. We will subdivide it now that we have given you a taste of it and an introduction. The summer is coming. It's time to practice. If you have an RV, go camping, and don't go to the wild on your own. That's not prudent. You can go and rent a space in campsite like we do, and where it's luxurious. We have water, we have electricity if we want to plug in, although the RV is completely independent. And you have the river there. The one we go to, it has a huge river. And when it's summer, like, the water is low, so the children can even play in the water, and even us. And but we're equipped. We have rubber boots, and we have the hats in case of the sun. And then we go and look at the plants and study them. We even have a microscope to check the plants and look them closer. And the children are surprised because they do not know that most of the flowers, not all of them, but many of the flowers in the field are eatable, which is amazing, because at least in the summer, you know you're not going to starve. And nuts also, hazelnuts, and there are other nuts that you can eat from even from an oak tree, and this will teach you this. All right, so this is the presentation for this time, and we hope you have enjoyed it. And may the Lord bless you and cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace, because he created all things. He can do it for you. God bless you.